Welcome everyone to the second podcast of the year. Today we're here with Nova Systems Senior Consultant Engineer Ben Luther and myself, Ravi J. Gampala from the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics UNSW student branch. And today we'll be discussing the Australian defence industry. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures and connections to the waters and lands of New South Wales. Our last episode was also with Nova Systems. That was with our Vice Chair, Alan Jin, and two Nova Systems engineers, and they go more into what kind of jobs are at Nova and how to get through uni and things like that. So today will be a bit more focused podcast. So before we start, Ben, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and your career in defence?
Okay, good evening. Thanks for the opportunity, Ravi. Thanks for the invite for us to come and talk to you guys. Fortunately, it's been a little while since I was at uni. I'm trying to remember my time at University of New South Wales. So happy to be talking to you guys and contributing back. So yeah, exciting times when you're at uni looking outwards. For me, I joined the Air Force. That was my ticket to aircraft. I knew I wanted to work in aviation, and the Air Force provided that. Unfortunately, it was back in the 1990s. Yes, I'm that old. And it was back then, you really had to work for Qantas or the Air Force. TAA had just collapsed and removed that avenue. And for me, it was Air Force all the way. So that was my motivation. I just wanted to work with airplanes. Looking back, it also gave me an opportunity to work with high technology stuff, which was the other part. So a little bit more focus on my pathway to becoming a flight test engineer. I actually joined, I studied engineering, aero-eng, although Air Force got me to change to a Bachelor of Technology to then pursue pilot training. I ended up operational aircrew with the P3s. TACO there, did a couple of tours, operational tours. I then was picked up for and expressed an interest in the flight test side of it. And at the time, Air Force was preparing for the arrival of, and the change, very much the cultural change to mission aircraft. So rather than it being aircraft used to carry people or heavy things, just cargo capacity, Air Force was changing to pick up wedge tail, with a view to development of the P3 and also the tanker program. And at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Fawcett, Dave Fawcett, was CORG. He's now a senator, for those who recognise the name. He was the one who pushed, and I am grateful. He pushed, he recruited me, he put me through flight test training, and I was fortunate to be the first to go through as an operational aircrew, but non-pilot, specifically to assess and do the flight test of mission aircraft, so the back-end systems of wedge tail, P3 development, later P8, Triton, all the big mission system platforms. From there, I did a couple of tours and ended up getting into the safety side of it, complex system safety, aviation. It's all high value assets, lots of stuff that we need to protect, the people, the assets, the bystanders, the third parties, all that sort of thing needs to be considered. And once I'd had a bit of experience, I was in a position to start supervising test conduct, and that's another way of saying you're assuring the safety of it. That's how I ended up doing flight test. Really started back just wanting to work with airplanes.
Awesome. That's a long journey from the 90s there. A lot of our listeners here at UNSW currently would have been born probably in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it's good to see
Yeah,
such a big experience. So
it,
after
it
your
happens. You work in airplanes for a while and you love it, and then you turn around and realize that you've been around a while.
yeah, and following on from your career in defense, you're now at Nova Systems. So how was that transition, and what made the switch? What made you want to switch from ADF to Nova?
Uh, I didn't leave the ADF because I didn't like it. I still look back very fondly. Loved my time in uniform. Um, at the time, I was working at ARGU, the Research and Development Unit. I was active in the safety space where we're trying to implement safety process on what is a very uncertain developmental environment. So you've got these conflicting objectives. You want to enable innovation whilst also controlling the output. So you get civil aviation achieves phenomenal safety records. Really, the European high-speed trains and civilian aviation in the Western world stand out as being remarkably safe transport modes of transport, where we talk about having accident rates down at 1 by 10 to the minus 9. That sets the bar, but that is achieved by locking down technologies and processes so that we know what the outcome is going to be. And yet we don't want to do that in technical development. We don't know how this is going to be achieved. Therefore, we need to try different things. We need to invent a new way, invent new technologies, implement new processes, get people to do things in a different way. That was what we were dealing with at ARGU, and I was researching some of that at University of South Australia. I was active with the flight test organisations, and I was offered a job at Gulfstream. Those guys had just been through an accident with the loss of aircraft 2 in the Gulfstream G650 program. My respects to the guys who lost their lives in that accident, and the fantastic team around them. They ended up in a situation where, believe it or not, the textbook was wrong. The textbook that had been taught at the test pilot schools for generations. I have a copy of that book. If you're ever involved in the aerodynamics, I feel part of that responsibility to teach the world and be really careful of that boundary layer effects, in-ground effect. It's not quite as reported in the textbook, and it's available online. If you need to have a look, Gulfstream G650 accident, look it up. If you're ever involved in that, have a little alarm bell go off in the back of your mind. Anyway, I was recruited to Gulfstream to implement the safety change that we put through that organisation after the accident, and it became apparent that the costs of an accident are enormous. That test article, there's the value in the physical aircraft, plus the value in the instrumentation that's put into the aircraft. So now we're probably up around $100 million in the aircraft, not to mention the people who lost their lives, which is immeasurable. We can never replace that. But then there's the project costs as well. That set back the certification program for that aircraft, and Gulfstream recognised that and brought me over to help form the Aviation Safety Office. And from there, we put through a raft of changes in how developmental flight test is undertaken, so that they're now best practice. We researched, we brought in best agreed wherever it was, and we've also published all of that on the Society of Flight Test Engineers websites and the Flight Test Safety Committee. So that's all now publicly available. But that's why I left Air Force. I was offered that opportunity, and yeah, it was a phenomenal experience. Again, had a wonderful time with some really great people over in Gulfstream in the United States. And, awesome product to be associated with. And then from there, I moved back to Nova. For that, family considerations. I needed to, it was just at the time in my life where we moved from the United States back to Australia. I knew of Nova and great reputation. I wanted to be part of that. So I gave them a call. I knew people who worked at Nova. That's how I knew it was a good place to work. I knew of them as well as some of the people involved, and was lucky enough to, again, get picked up for a role at Nova.
That's awesome. And what specifically are you doing now for Nova?
I'm largely a project manager in my current role,
Okay.
but project management from a perspective of the technologies. So I specialize in roles where it's a bit different. I'm trying to be a little bit humble, but I'm also quite proud of what I do. I get involved where it's complex, where we kind of don't know how this is gonna go, where there's generally airplanes involved, where there's complexity involved, where there's new technologies, and we're trying to deliver to the customer a way to bring it all together, bring together the people, the processes, the technologies, the environment to make it work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because you mentioned in your bio that you've experienced the importance of culture and perspective, and factoring that into implementation. And how can you elaborate that, and how have you applied that during your
How
work?
I applied that, I've been very fortunate in all the stuff I've been involved with as part of that shift into flight test within the Air Force and being introduced to mission systems. I was embedded inside Airbus in Spain for a number of years as the customer's flight test engineer. And working in Spain is that wonderful people to live amongst, but they have different expectations. Culturally, they are different people. Even things like trying to explain back to Australia that August is the summer holidays in Spain. The fact that they're working during August in Australia is irrelevant, because in Spain, where we were, that's summer holiday time. So that cultural difference is just, it's the people element of it. When you're working in the United States, to table an issue means to set it aside. In Australia, to table an issue means to get it out there on the table and discuss it. And they are completely different things. Just cultural differences in how you deal with people in the military. It's very forthright. When I'm writing to a military audience, it's very to a uniformed military audience. You can be quite abrupt if you waffle on, and it's like, oh, this is just weird. It's just like a military email is ... go send. You don't want to do that in Spain. It'd be a bit weird. The US is different again. So yeah, yes, I'm an engineer. Yes, I'm a project manager, but I've also had some great experiences bringing teams together cross-culturally, both national cultures, but also company cultures. Gulfstream was quite proud of their company culture as being distinct from the military. So that was different again too.
Yeah, such a diverse experience there. Not just the people, but the culture is also. That's so good to see such a diverse career. We're moving on to one of the next topic is how have you seen defense shape and grow in the lifetime, and how do you see the direction of what defense is headed in within the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
Defense is actually, it depends what you define as defense now. The definition of defense has changed. When I joined, it was a lot more uniforms. Uniform defense is now, I believe it's smaller. It is smaller. So
yeah, definitely.
There's a lot fewer uniforms, but I struggle to accurately report the numbers of civilians and industry. I feel like there's many more. that it is a much broader base. So while there's fewer uniforms, there's more support through industry and the APS. When I joined, there were discrete aircraft. They weren't networked. There was no, the individual aircraft were, and individual platforms, ships, tanks, vehicles, everything was individual assets. We don't have technologies now that operate independently quite like that. We get much better performance from our systems when we integrate them, network them, allow them to leverage off each other, to learn from each other, to have remote sensing through each other. Much better effects. And that's just not in the military either. That's, my mobile phone is the same as anybody else's, and it is what it is because it is complex, because it is networked, because it is a platform that hosts other apps. And that's really exciting technology. So the military has changed. It's now got those technologies as well. And of course, many of those technologies come from the military. The military is one of the areas where you get to experience new technologies early. Just thinking back, not that it's Australian, but the American examples. What did the American space program bring us? Velcro and
ballpoint pen,
ballpoint pens, water purification technologies, and I don't know, many things. I'm reticent now to actually start pointing to individuals because I'm sure I'll get it wrong. But I am aware that there's a lot of technologies that came from the space programs, and it's the military features a lot of technology that you can get involved with, and that's what's kept me interested. That's what I really enjoy working on, that sort of stuff. I've seen that really burgeon, that really grow whilst I've been employed in the defence industry.
And on that topic of technology and what has defence, and I guess a career in defence, provided you that a career in just the civil industry couldn't? Say, for example, civil aerospace couldn't.
As an Australian, the military gave me access to flight test. Now, in the United States, you can, and that's principally why I pursued it in the US as well. So, military, the defence industry, so I'm using defence industry to generalise away from just uniform military, but to also include defence industry and APS. It provides more than just aircraft operations. For me, it was just more than aircraft operations. So when I look at the civilian aviation sector, it's certainly got some great aircraft, some great operations. But they're principally you carry something from point A to point B. There's a little bit of so things like helicopter rescue, which is a little bit different. There's a little bit of airborne mapping and sensing type work out there, but it's remarkable because it's not common. The lion's share of it is the transport side, whereas for me, defence industry gave me access to use aeroplanes in all sorts of different ways. So different ways that included different sensing technologies, different extremely heavy payloads, refueling airborne refueling operations, night vision goggles, night operations, all sorts of different things.
Yeah. Awesome. And is for the students here, why should or shouldn't they consider a career in defence, whether that be uniformed personnel or working with a defence contractor, or even APS, Australian Public Service?
You get to see different things. You get to one is not better than the other. It's just a choice you have to make. It's a natural choice you have to make in your career. I'm as interested in everything as any other engineer out there. If there's some new system on an Airbus or a Boeing with a commercial airline or with defence, I'm interested. I want in, but ultimately you do have to choose. As choice always means excluding something else, which is unfortunate. Because I would like to be involved in space and trains and ships and aeroplanes and all sorts of different things. But I made my choice. For me, defence industry offers a lot of technology that I can get involved with, that I can be a part of, that I can help develop within Australia. There is much more than there used to be, which is great. I want to celebrate that. But we now do have a little space industry growing up, particularly here in Adelaide. I get to see that. We do have new technologies industries starting up, which was not always the case. But defence does offer an avenue to work in those high-tech spaces and be involved in the development of those and the implementation of them and the operational rollout. It's not just a maintenance activity. We get to be involved in the acquisition and sometimes the tailoring, but almost certainly the tailoring of the technology, but almost certainly the tailoring of the operation and how it's going to be used and what is the optimization of that for Australia.
100%. And you mentioned how space is becoming more of an important aspect of defence, and because here at the AIAA we have a mix of aviation lovers and mix of space lovers. So
We're all the same. Aviation and space lovers, we're not that different.
Just last week, actually, the Royal Australian Air Force officially begun the Space Command. So, with that in mind, and I guess your experience with Nova, how big do you see a space portion of defence coming in within the near future, and where can students or how can new graduates get involved into that?
Sorry, I actually don't have any insight into that side of it.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah.
That's cool. No worries. Following on from the last question is there any misconceptions students or people may think about defence that would deter them from joining? Like any just things like in the background you hear, like, oh, that's definitely not true, that a lot of people say?
Probably just the assumption that you have to be in uniform. Now, I think I spoke to it earlier when I joined, yes, the proportions were different. There was a lot more uniforms. Now, not so much. There's a lot more Australian defence industry that is broadly supporting the Department of Defence more generally than just being in uniform. There are now many more options. Defence generally look for specialist skills and long-term support from industry, so we stand ready to provide that.
Yeah. And following on the point from uniform personnel, one of the questions is what exactly is the difference other than uniform between the ADF and Australian Public Service? Because they're both government jobs. How
they are? They're employed under and I'll caveat my answer with I'm not current or a current expert on HR on these two arenas. I'm not employed by either. I'm currently defence industry. But I feel I can provide a top level answer, which is uniform people are part of the military side of it, and the APS, just to state the obvious, when the APS are employed under the Australian Public Service, they have different terms of employment. They're employed under those two separate organisations, but they do work hand in glove. The military have within the Department of Defence, those in uniform have a military obligation, and the APS have a supporting function.
Yeah, good to know. A common buzzword that gets thrown around is sovereign capability. Whether you're it's a nice one, but for the folks at home, what does this mean, and why do you think it's important for Australia?
Sovereign is the idea that it's Australian owned and operated, and to be sovereign, it has to be 100%. I don't think you can kind of be half sovereign. That just kind of misses the point. To be sovereign means it is not only domiciled in Australia, but its interests and its ownership and its operations are also coherent and aligned with Australia. They are here in Australia. So it's not just it can't be just a badge. At work, at Nova, we talk about the example of the car industries. We used to build vehicles here in Adelaide, but the decision to stop was made in Detroit. That was a business decision that came from Michigan and in the United States, out of the headquarters in Detroit. If you've got a sovereign capability or a sovereign company in Australia, that doesn't happen. That decision would be made here in Australia in consideration of Australian interests rather than the bottom line of a financial spreadsheet somewhere else in the world.
Yeah. And I guess in the terms of being sovereign, would that mean there's more jobs just for Australians and I guess more job prospects for our students?
I suppose it does. Yeah. In that to be sovereign means you are invested in Australia. Yes.
Yeah. And moving on to questions more towards your career, and I guess systems engineering is, I guess it's pretty important through complex systems in aerospace. And for our engineering students, can you explain why it's important and, how can students be thinking about systems engineering currently in their coursework or projects or anything?
From where I am, I don't think you can escape systems engineering anymore. So when I went through, it was aero-eng and electrical engineering and civil and chemical, and they were all very distinct. Now I find myself wishing I'd done more electrical engineering, electronic engineering, a bit of mechatronics, and a whole heap more software. I think now I just couldn't have done enough software. So it kind of reflects more on that idea of integrated systems. And when you start integrating them, they become complex, and we find ourselves in a systems engineering world. Humanity, have gotten past the point where an individual makes something anymore. I'm not sure we live in a world where, and I'd like to think you can make an individual contribution, but I also celebrate that we don't anymore. We now work as teams, and I can't be expert in all things to everybody, but I can contribute this part of it to a team. And now we're in the realm of systems engineering, where we have a development process where we need to, and a big part of systems engineering is assurance, to make sure, and the word assure, to make sure, to guarantee, to ensure that we deliver the capability we're after. So we're not in a world anymore where we just have a discrete object. Where, as I part of the intro I spoke about, there being networked effects and no longer a simple system. We build resilience into them by having multiple pathways. Yeah, so systems engineering provides that build up of capability from numerous inputs to support the objective.
There you go. And you just mentioned it there, and it's also in your bio, systems assurance. And assuring, I guess, like you said, assuring that your system is functional and capable. Can you explain that further? And can engineers at uni apply this in their work and projects?
The assurance is a way of providing to the customer and to the operator what it is they're seeking. You can also assure safety. You can assure contract compliance. There's all sorts of different different perspectives on the word assurance. My interest in the concept of assurance comes from the generality of test. In order to provide assurance, you test a system, and that test can be actually more generalized to verify or validate, of which test can be an element. So sometimes we provide assurance just by documentation. You can say that a third party has provided a certificate to say that this system will do what the manufacturer says it will do. Other times, and the bits I particularly enjoy, are the flight test side of it, where in fact we don't know. There is no one else who does know, and so we design a test to go and prove it. And we prove it in order to provide assurance. That's where the test comes into it, how test becomes part of systems engineering. So as part of the team, someone will specify what it is the client, the customer, the operator, the military agency, because we were talking defence industry, someone wants the machine to do something, and they need to be sure that it is going to do it. And then from there, we work to assure that by test.
There you go. It's like, I guess it's that system engineering feedback loop of validating and verifying. So
Yeah,
big important part.
I'm sure somewhere in the syllabus at university, in the system engineering courses, you've seen the V,
the big
down one side and up the other, and the assurance processes are the little bridges from one side of the V to the other, where you're comparing what you said you were going to do with what you've got. And so is that what we're after?
And going back to your career with the RAF and Gulfstream and Nova, so how did your time in the Air Force and the skills that you've learned, whether it be soft skills or the flight test engineering skills, how did all the skills from the RAF help you prepare for your time at Gulfstream and at Nova Systems?
Aviation experience is probably the bedrock. So I learned what it is to operate an aircraft, operate as a crew, but also operate, so the soft skills of operating as a crew, but also the operational aspects of flying an aircraft safely. So that's kind of the bedrock. Then within the military, I was fortunate enough to get sent away to a TB school where they teach flight test skills. I was able to use those. Bit of project management in there as well. Communication skills, the military is always big on teaching those. These are all things that just become part of job readiness. So you're never employed just for one thing. Very early on, an aircrew instructor made it quite clear to me that you might be the smartest person on the planet. That doesn't matter unless you can tell your team about it. Okay, so there's more to it. There's the soft skills side of it. You need to have your technical skills, but then you need to have your soft skills within the team, and then you also have to keep an eye on what it is that the client, the operator need, so that we can steer the team towards that and make sure we assure the product, assure the process.
Yeah. So you mentioned the communication skills and the project management skills from the RAF transferred over. For our students that are still in uni, they're looking for an internship, or maybe they've graduated looking for a grad role. What kind of soft skills can they prepare for? Can prepare and work on, so they can be ready whether they join Defence Force or defence contractor? What are the key skills?
There's really no limit. And there's always an argument that you can have more or different.
Yeah.
So within, of course, you're going to need communication skills, you're going to need organisation skills, you're going to need basic computer skills, you're going to need, and if you can do software programming as well, that's also awesome. there's really no limit. I wouldn't shy away from any of them, and certainly advocate for all of them. But the art is going to be in playing to your strengths, recognizing which of those skills you're particularly adept at and applying them, as well as then trying to bolster the ones you're not so good at.
Yeah. I guess, did you have any in specific that I guess like the top, say top three skills that would be best to work on that you've seen in your lifetime?
Empathy and ability to see it from someone else's perspective. Communication skills, but I know that's a bit of a throwaway term, so I'll make it a little more specific. The ability to concisely and clearly convey your point and then listen to the other person, which ties it back to the empathy. And I'll pass on a third one. I'll leave it at that.
Top two. There we go. Thank you. And coming near the end of the podcast, for our engineering students at home, do you have any, I guess, key points of wisdom or advice for them in their studies, and how can they best get ready for a career and stuff?
The things I've learned in the last couple of years would be you can never have enough maths and you can never have enough software programming skill. So here was I thinking I was going to be an aviation engineer. I am, but I also need those skills. So therein lies the art, balancing all those. And it's not possible to do it all. It's just finding a balance that works for you and recognizing that it's not ever going to be just one thing. You are going to be asked to provide a balance across your soft skills, your tech skills, your interest in software programming, your interest in space, and your interest in aviation safety, and all of the above. The focus now is on systems engineering. It is on combining all those things. It's no longer just enough to be an aviation engineer or an aero engineer, as I started out with. I just do engines, or I just do wings. Very few people get to do that anymore. It's now how you bring all these things together.
Wow. Be jack of all trades. Huh. We'll try to be. And I guess, for finishing up a little early, but is there a way for people to contact you, or an email or something, if anyone has any questions about your career as a flight test engineer or in defence?
Probably best just to stick with the Nova email address for the grad program. They're very active. They don't change their email address either. So they're very active. They're very contactable, and they can provide answers if I'm not available.
Yeah.
Or they'll reach out to me. They can do both.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Ben. We're just finishing up now. So yes, this was the second podcast with Nova Systems Engineering and the defense industry, and Ben's career as a flight test engineer. Thank you so much for listening, people at home. Stay tuned for more events on our Facebook page, our Discord, find us on LinkedIn as well, and see you at our next events. Thank you.